She walked into the grocery store like any elder would, slow, quiet, invisible. They saw gray hair and wrinkled hands. What they didn't see was the woman who once decoded enemy transmissions, who served a country that still judged her by skin, not sacrifice. By the time they looked closer, it was too late. Pricewell Grocery was the kind of place where people argued about coupons and bulk cereal. It smelled like bleach and freezer burn, and no one looked twice at the old woman slowly pushing her cart down aisle 5. Her name was Ms. Ruth Langston, 74 years old, crocheted hat, thick glasses, a small cane she refused to replace even though the rubber tip was worn down to metal. Her cart rattled gently as she made her way past the canned goods. People didn't notice her necklace, thin gold, barely visible under her buttoned sweater. A pendant that looked simple, until you were close enough to read the engraving. But no one got that close. Not yet. Aisle 5 was quiet until the shouting started. Up near the self-checkout lanes, 2 young security guards, barely past 25, were trying to stop a boy from running. He dropped something, then sprinted. Everyone turned. Ruth didn't. She just kept walking. Quiet, deliberate. But her walk, her timing, would place her in the wrong place at the worst moment. She reached the end of the aisle just as the store's assistant manager called out, "Grab her." One of the young officers, face red and pulse high, saw Ruth, still walking, still calm, and assumed she was the one the manager meant. "Hey," he barked. She turned, startled. "Me." He didn't answer. He grabbed her arm. Not gently. "What's in your bag?" "My purse," she asked, confused. "Don't play dumb." The second officer rushed over. Now the store had gone quiet. Customers froze. Phones came out. And Ms. Ruth? She stood with her head tilted slightly, eyes soft but tired. Not surprised, just disappointed. "I didn't take anything," she said softly. "Then you won't mind if we check." The first cop snapped. The manager finally came closer. "Wait, that's not the one." The kid ran. But they weren't listening. Because she looked like someone who might. Because sometimes, suspicion doesn't come from behavior. It comes from bias. "Please," Ruth whispered. "I have arthritis in that shoulder." The officer yanked her purse. Her necklace slipped out from under her sweater. He didn't notice, but one woman in the crowd did. Eyes widened. She started recording. "Officers," the woman called. "You might want to look at her necklace." They ignored her. So she said it louder. "She's wearing a VA Intelligence Commendation medallion. She's someone." That's when the second officer glanced down and froze. There it was. Gold. Polished. Sealed with a federal insignia most people never saw. The kind of award given to people who don't just serve quietly, but do so in classified capacity. The kind of necklace that says, "She's not who you think she is." The crowd stirred. A few people started clapping. Others started filming. And the assistant manager went pale. To the officers, it was just another stop. To Ruth Langston, it was the start of something bigger. Because she'd been quiet her whole life. But now the world was watching. And silence wasn't her duty anymore. The officer stepped back, eyes locked on the pendant now glowing under the store's fluorescent lights. It was small, elegant, but the detail was impossible to miss. A golden circle etched with an eagle, wings extended across a ring of 13 stars. Beneath that, an inscription most civilians couldn't even decode. Department of Veteran Affairs, Directorate for Intelligence Support. The second officer leaned in. "What is that?" The woman filming answered before Ms. Ruth could. "That's a federal commendation. My uncle got one from the Pentagon. You don't just get those." The store had gone completely silent. Ruth stood straighter, not to explain herself, but to remind them she didn't owe them any. The manager rushed over, red-faced and rattled. I'm sorry, ma'am. This has all been a misunderstanding." Ms. Ruth raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so now I ma'am." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The officers were quiet now. Too quiet. One of them looked like he wanted to disappear. The other still had a sliver of pride, fighting to stay on his face. But it was fading. Fast. Another woman approached, mid-30s, wearing scrubs, and holding her phone to her chest like it was sacred. "I saw what happened," she said gently. They grabbed you without cause. Ruth nodded once. They didn't ask. Just assumed. You want me to send you the video? No need. Just hold on to it. A younger man chimed in. They can't get away with that. Not after seeing that necklace. Ruth gave him a small, tired smile. They've gotten away with worse. Outside the store, the crowd spilled into the parking lot. Some still recording. Others whispering about what they'd just witnessed. The clip had already hit a local community page before Ruth even made it to her car. 30 seconds of silent racism, and 2 seconds of a necklace that spoke louder than any argument ever could. That night, the video reached over 48,000 views in 5 hours. By morning, it was 200,000. People were sharing it with captions like, "She served her country. It didn't serve her back. Her silence was more powerful than their badge. We need to know her name." They soon would. The next morning, a knock came at Ruth's door. She opened it to find Captain Teresa McConnell, dressed in a crisp navy blue blazer, insignia pinned over her heart. "Ms. Langston," she asked respectfully. Ruth nodded. "Yes, I'm with the Department of Veteran Affairs. We saw the video. I served under someone who used to speak of you often." Ruth blinked. Slowly. "Oh, he called you the ghost cipher. Said you cracked codes no one else could." Ruth smiled faintly. "That was a long time ago. Still matters today." Captain McConnell handed her a folder. "The Secretary of Veterans Affairs would like to issue a formal apology. The city's already been contacted. There's talk of a public acknowledgement." Ruth took the envelope, but her eyes were tired. "I don't want parades. I want them to stop dragging people like me through dirt before checking who we are." Captain McConnell nodded. "Understood. And even if I were just a woman buying groceries, I'd still deserve respect." "That's the part we're working on, ma'am." That afternoon, Ruth sat at her window sipping tea. The sunlight hit her necklace, just right. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel invisible. Before the arthritis, before the cane, before she was the quiet old woman at the grocery store, Ruth Langston went by another name. Agent R.M. Langston. She wore heels like they were combat boots and lipstick like war paint. She didn't just serve. She solved things that scared men with 10 times her clearance. And she did it in silence. It was 1976 when she joined the Defense Intelligence Agency, recruited right out of Howard University. They had seen something in her, something sharp, something hidden. They needed translators, codebreakers, women who could think 3 steps ahead in a world where the enemy was always changing its mask. Ruth wasn't flashy. She didn't talk big. But she could read enemy encryptions faster than the mainframe could process them. And in 1981, she intercepted a message that stopped a chemical weapon transfer in North Africa before it reached the wrong hands. No news article. No medal ceremony. Just a memo with her initials and a quiet thank you from a director who never looked her in the eye. For 17 years, she decoded everything from enemy weapon manuals to whispered threats sent through back-channel audio logs. But in meetings, her voice was often ignored, until a man repeated the same idea 2 minutes later. She never flinched. She just kept solving. Because in her world, noise didn't equal power. Proof did. She left the agency in 1993 after her last mission in Eastern Europe. Nothing dramatic. No fanfare. Just a quiet exit and a desk drawer full of secrets she'd never be allowed to share. She returned to her hometown in Illinois, bought a small house, and learned to enjoy silence. Real silence. The kind you choose. She taught math at a local community center, volunteered for veterans who didn't even know she was one of them, and shopped at Pricewell twice a week, always in the morning before the lines got long. The necklace. That was the only thing she kept from her years in the dark. Not to show off. Just to remind herself that she was once trusted with the kind of truth most people aren't strong enough to hold. The irony wasn't lost on her when 2 junior officers had yanked her arm and demanded to know what she was hiding. Because for most of her life, she'd been hiding her whole self. Back in the present, Ruth sat in her living room as her niece, Nia, flipped through the folder Captain McConnell had left. "This is crazy," Nia said. I knew you work for the government, but you never told me this." Ruth smiled. "You don't tell secrets when you're trained to keep them." "Yeah, but Auntie, this makes you a legend." "No, baby. It makes me tired." Nia laughed. "Tired or not, the internet thinks you're Queen Ruth now. You've got veterans tagging you in tribute posts." Ruth looked away, out the window. "I just want people to stop acting like dignity has a dress code." The doorbell rang. It was a journalist from a national news outlet. Ruth opened the door, ready to turn them away. But the young woman paused and said gently, "My grandmother was in the Women's Army Corps. She always said black women had to serve twice and speak half as much. I just wanted to say thank you." Ruth didn't smile, but she didn't close the door either. She nodded. "Then maybe you understand why I stayed quiet." The journalist asked, "Are you still staying quiet?" Ruth considered the question. "I don't have to speak," she said. "Not when the world's finally listening." By Wednesday morning, the video had crossed 1 million views. Not just views, reactions. Veterans reposted it with hashtags like #HonorRuth and #WeSaluteYou. Civil rights pages called her the hidden soldier they didn't see coming. Even celebrities began chiming in. One actor tweeted, "This is what black excellence looks like. Quiet, patient, unbothered until she's provoked." And with every repost, the heat turned up on the two officers. Officer Dalton and Officer Reese sat stiffly in a conference room at precinct headquarters. The chief of internal affairs stood over a folder, so thick it looked like a legal brick. "Public relations is on fire," he said coldly. "Do either of you understand what you just did?" Dalton tried to shrug it off. She matched a vague description. "We were trying to be proactive." "Proactive," the chief snapped. "She wasn't even near the theft. And you never verified anything before putting hands on a senior citizen." Reese muttered, "We didn't know who she was." "That's exactly the problem," the chief growled. "You treated her like a suspect because she was elderly, black, and alone. Now, she's a retired federal asset with a commendation you two idiots couldn't spell." Across the city, Ruth sat in her living room, watching a panel of anchors dissect the event like it was a public trial. She never raised her voice. One anchor said, "That's what made it more powerful." Another added, "It's the dignity that unsettled people." She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just stood there, and that necklace said the rest. Nia scrolled through comments on her phone. "She's all of our mothers. Our grandmothers. The calmness. The poise. I hope I carry myself like that when it's my turn. This is why you treat everyone with respect, because you never know who's standing in front of you." Ruth turned down the volume. She didn't need the noise. She had already lived the proof. By Friday, things got worse for the officers. The Civilian Oversight Board launched a formal inquiry. Multiple complaints were filed, not by Ruth, but by witnesses who had been in the store that day. 3 people from the crowd submitted affidavits describing the aggression, the tone, the dismissiveness. 2 of them had never met Ruth before in their lives, but they couldn't forget the way her shoulder dipped when her bag was yanked. How she stood still while the world shifted around her. How they had once ignored people like her too. The grocery store issued a full-page public apology. Ruth received a personal visit from the regional manager, a gift basket, and a stack of corporate talking points she never read. She gave the basket to her neighbor. And the apology letter? She folded it, filed it, and wrote on the front, "Didn't need this, but I kept it anyway." That weekend, a community group called Shield Our Seniors asked her to speak at their fundraiser dinner. She declined, then changed her mind. She wouldn't talk about the incident. She would talk about legacy, about being underestimated, about how many medals black women wore in silence, raising kids, serving countries, leading quietly through decades of disrespect, because maybe they wouldn't listen to anger, but they would listen to dignity armed with history. Meanwhile, Officer Dalton scrolled through Twitter in silence. He read one comment over and over again. It's one thing to be wrong. It's another to be loud and wrong, and the whole world has receipts. And for the first time, since that morning at Pricewell, he felt small. The church gymnasium smelled like coffee, folding chairs, and anticipation. It was standing room only. Rows of retirees, activists, local students, and off-duty city workers packed the building. Most had come not because they saw a flyer, but because they saw the video. The one with the old woman who didn't flinch. The one with the necklace. Ruth hadn't wanted to come. Not to speak. Not to perform. But this wasn't about her anymore. It was about every person who looked like her and had been treated like she wasn't supposed to matter. 2 folding chairs near the front were labeled guest speakers. One had Ruth's name. The other, Officers Dalton and Reese, attendance required. That had been the city's idea. A show of accountability. Both officers arrived 10 minutes early. Dalton looked like he hadn't slept. His badge had been removed per disciplinary review policy. Reese wore plain clothes. Fidgeted constantly. They sat. Silent. Still. Every glance from the crowd was a spotlight they couldn't hide from. The mayor gave a short welcome. We are gathered tonight not to shame, but to listen. Not to speak for, but to hear from. And then, our next speaker needs no introduction, but she deserves one. The applause that followed was not loud. It was steady. Purposeful. Respected. Ruth stepped up to the podium slowly, her cane clicking against the hardwood. She looked out over the room, at every pair of eyes waiting. Then at the 2 officers seated near the front. I'm not here to go viral, she began. I'm not here to relive that morning. I'm here because this happens every day, to people who don't wear a necklace. The room fell completely silent. I was stopped because I fit a story someone made up in their head. I didn't have the right look, the right walk, the right age, the right color. She turned to face the officers directly. I don't want your apologies. I want your reflection. Because I won't be in that store next week, but someone else will. And she might not have a medal, just her dignity. And that should be enough. A man in the back shouted, "Say that again, Ms. Ruth." But she didn't. She let the words hang there. Sharp, heavy, unapologetic. Dalton didn't raise his hand, but he stood up. His voice cracked. I didn't know who you were. That's the point, Ruth said gently. You shouldn't have needed to. Reese shifted in his seat, face flushed. A young girl in the second row whispered to her mom, "She's like a superhero." Someone else murmured, "No, baby, she's something even better. She's real." After the meeting, people lined up to shake Ruth's hand. Some cried. Some brought her books. A pastor offered to dedicate Sunday service to her courage. But she declined the spotlight. She told them, "Don't lift me. Lift the ones still invisible." As she prepared to leave, a city council member approached her with a plaque in hand. She looked at it for a moment, then handed it to a woman behind her in a nursing scrubs uniform. "She's the one who filmed it," Ruth said. "If she hadn't spoken up, none of y'all would be here." The crowd clapped again, not because they were told to, because they understood now. Dalton and Reese walked out through the back door. No cameras followed, but Gil did. For once, it wasn't just about losing a badge. It was about facing a truth they'd ignored until it wore a necklace and said their names in front of a town that finally listened. By the end of the week, the city was moving, slowly, but visibly. Council members introduced a motion called the Community Dignity Policy. It was filled with language that sounded good in press releases. De-escalation training for all officers. Mandatory suspension for misconduct towards seniors. Respect protocols for unarmed civilian interactions. The mayor called it a step in the right direction. The media called it an overdue adjustment. But Ruth, she just called it a start. She wasn't interested in photo ops or ribbon cuttings. So when a local news team requested a sit-down interview with soft music and dramatic lighting, she said no. Instead, she asked to visit Lincoln High School's U.S. government class. No cameras, no podium, just desks, teenagers, and truth. The students were half expecting a lecture. Instead, Ruth walked in holding a brown envelope and placed it on the desk. She didn't open with a story. She opened with a question. What does respect look like when nobody's watching? The room was silent. One student raised her hand, saying, "Yes, ma'am." Good start, Ruth replied. But respect ain't just manners. It's recognition. It's knowing the difference between who a person looks like and who they are. Then she pulled out the necklace. The class leaned in. She placed it on the desk. This got me listened to, she said. But I earned it long before they saw it. And long after, I was still ignored. Back at City Hall, Officer Dalton sat in a mandatory review hearing with the department's ethics board. He didn't speak much. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how to defend what happened when there were now 4 separate community complaints about similar behavior. 3 came after Ruth's story aired. People who'd once stayed silent. A woman who was followed in a store for looking nervous. A grandfather who was questioned for matching a vague description. A teenager stopped for walking with his hood up. All dismissed before. All taken seriously now. Because one woman said nothing and let a necklace say it all. Officer Reese submitted a formal letter requesting to be transferred to administrative duty. The letter didn't say, "I'm sorry." It said, "I need to understand the harm I caused." No excuses. No if I offended. Just truth. The department granted it. For the first time in years, someone stepped away from power on purpose. At home, Ruth sat in her kitchen, folding laundry slowly. Nia walked in holding her phone, smiling. A poet from DC wrote a whole piece about you. Ruth raised an eyebrow. A poem. Want to hear the title? Do I? Nia grinned. She wore a cane, a cardigan, and a warning. Ruth smirked. Clever. You inspired people. I didn't mean to. Still did. Ruth placed a folded shirt on the table and looked at the necklace lying beside her tea. I just wanted eggs. Meanwhile, the grocery store held a staff meeting. New policies were announced. Staff were trained on identifying profiling. And at the end of the session, a framed photo of Ruth was quietly placed on the break room wall. No gold frame. No long title. Just 3 words typed under her name. Respect. Always. First. Because in the end, the lesson wasn't about medals or memory. It was about presence. And how sometimes, the most powerful voices are the ones that never needed to shout. The sliding doors at Pricewell opened with their usual mechanical sigh. Same automated chime. Same scuffed tile floors. But this time it was different. Because everyone saw her. Not just a glance. Not the dismissive flick of the eyes reserved for seniors with canes. No, this time eyes lingered. Shoulders straightened. Ruth Langston had returned. Not for revenge. Not for applause. Just for eggs. And maybe a little peace. The same store manager, Mr. Farley, stood near the customer service counter, straightening impulse racks. He turned, caught her in his periphery, and froze. Then walked toward her with hands slightly raised, like someone approaching royalty, or a reckoning. "Ms. Langston," he said softly, "I just wanted to say we've made some changes." She nodded once. "I heard. We added a new senior care protocol. Community liaison outreach. We, had staff retraining." She tilted her head slightly. "You retrain people to be decent." Farley swallowed. "We're trying." "Trying's good," she said. "But I came for eggs, not speeches." As she pushed her cart toward the dairy aisle, she noticed it. The sign. Laminated. Nailed to the wall above the exit. This store stands against profiling, discrimination, and the erasure of dignity, regardless of age, race, or status. No fancy graphics. No small print. Just bold text and a new logo stamped in the corner. Respect starts here. In aisle 4, 2 teens whispered to each other as she passed. One nudged the other. "Dude, that's the lady from the necklace story." Ruth smirked. Not because they recognized her, but because she now recognized herself again. Not a relic. Not a target. Just a woman who'd outlived injustice long enough to call it out with grace sharper than steel. Near the register, a young cashier named Jamila smiled wide when Ruth approached. "Good morning, ma'am. Let me carry that for you." Ruth handed her the basket. "You know who I am." "Yes, ma'am." "Then don't call me ma'am, like I'm fragile." Jamila chuckled. "Yes, Ms. Ruth." "Got it." Outside, as she waited for a ride, A boy no older than 10 tugged at her sleeve. "Are you the one who didn't yell?" She looked down at him. "I didn't need to." He paused. "My grandma said you reminded her of herself." Ruth softened. "Then your grandma must be made of something strong. She said you're what grace looks like." "Grace only works," Ruth said, "when people are finally watching." At that moment, a city bus rolled past. On the side was a poster, a drawing of Ruth in profile, head high, cane in hand, necklace glinting in the sun. The caption read, "Don't wait for medals to give people their worth." That night, Ruth sat at her kitchen table, sipping mint tea as the news played faintly in the background. A panel of experts debated police reform again. She muted it, because sometimes silence isn't about being quiet. It's about choosing what deserves your energy. And today, she had used hers to reclaim something more powerful than public approval. Her space, her dignity, her return. 3 weeks after the incident, Ruth received the first letter. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address, only her name handwritten in blue ink, neat, unsure, careful. She opened it slowly, expecting another media request or a politician's thank you card. But this wasn't either. The paper trembled slightly in her hands. "Ms. Langston, I was in the store that day. I was the woman by the freezer section, holding my daughter's hand. I saw what happened. I saw them grab you and I froze. I didn't say a word. I should have. I went home and cried that night. Not just for you, but because I realized I've been silent too many times. Thank you for not raising your voice. Because somehow, your silence spoke louder than I ever have. I'm learning. I promise. A witness who's ready now." She folded the letter and placed it in her drawer. Not because it flattered her, but because it reminded her that even inaction leaves a trail. The second letter arrived that same week. Typed, 2 pages long. Signed, Angela M. Reyes, store cashier, Pricewell number 18. Angela explained how she had seen the look on Ruth's face. Not fear, but that particular weariness only people who've been wrongly accused before recognize. "I wanted to say something, but I was new. I didn't want to lose my job. I thought maybe the manager had a reason. I'm sorry I waited until the internet told me how wrong it was. But I also want you to know, since then, I've spoken up twice. Once for a young black man being followed by security, and once for an older Latino woman being questioned for wandering in the baby aisle. This time, I didn't freeze, because you reminded me that quiet doesn't equal small." Ruth read the letters late at night, with a lamp on and her old jazz records playing softly in the background. She didn't reply to them. She didn't need to. She kept them, filed them under a new folder in her drawer labeled Echoes, because that's what they were, echoes of her voice in the mouths of others. At church the next Sunday, the Reverend invited her to stand and receive a Justice Peacemaker recognition. She declined, but she stayed after service longer than usual. A teenage girl approached her in the courtyard. "I'm applying for ROTC," she said nervously. "People keep telling me to pick something safer. My mom showed me your video. She said, 'See this woman? She served and didn't need to brag.' But the world still knew." Ruth smiled. Service doesn't always need applause, but it always needs intent. The girl nodded, eyes shining. "Then I'll serve like that." Meanwhile, Officer Dalton sat in mandatory sensitivity training with 3 other officers and a facilitator who opened with the hard truth. Bias isn't about hating someone. It's about assuming you know them before they speak. Dalton didn't argue. He didn't defend. Because for once, he wasn't the one with control in the room. And in the quiet moments, he remembered Ruth's voice at the town meeting. Not raised, not trembling, just firm. "I want your reflection." And now, he had no choice but to do it. That night, Ruth stood at her kitchen window, looking out at the quiet street. Her porch light hummed softly. The breeze carried faint laughter from a barbecue 3 houses down. And for a moment, everything felt still, but not empty, because the silence now was earned, not forced. And behind that stillness were letters, whispers, apologies, and actions, all sparked by a woman who refused to shout, because she knew who she was the moment her necklace slipped into the light. The necklace wasn't supposed to be worn in public. That's what the agency told her. It was an internal commendation, symbolic, they said, meant for display on retirement plaques, not grocery store errands. But Ruth Langston never cared much for what was meant to stay behind glass. She wore it not for attention, not for honor, but for memory. Because there were days when the weight of her age made her feel invisible. And that necklace reminded her that somewhere, deep in a locked file, the government still had her name underlined. Nia found her sitting on the porch, polishing it with a cloth. It shimmered under the late afternoon sun. "You ever gonna tell me what that thing really means?" Nia asked, stepping onto the wooden steps with a glass of cold lemonade in hand. Ruth didn't look up. "You already know what it means to them," she said. "But you want to know what it means to me." Nia nodded, settling beside her. "Yeah, I do." Ruth stared out at the street. "You ever done something important and been told not to speak of it?" Nia shrugged. "Maybe. Now imagine giving your entire youth to something like that. Traveling to countries you can't name. Decoding enemy chatter you're not supposed to admit existed. Saving lives through silence." Nia's eyes widened. That was real. Ruth nodded once. "Very." She took a deep breath, and for the first time, she let herself remember. Not just the mission, but the moment. Berlin. 1989. She was 38, dressed in a civilian trench coat, tapping into signal intercepts coming from an abandoned consulate safe house. She caught a transmission that warned of a staged riot, planned to pull media cameras in one direction, while a second team slipped through an airstrip to move weapons under false refugee tags. She decrypted the pattern in 97 seconds. The weapons never moved. The riot never happened. And in the report, her name was only listed as analyst, Langston, clearance level 4. No one gave her a handshake. No medal on national television. Just a quietly delivered envelope and a medallion inside. That was the moment she knew. Service didn't always look like a flag over your shoulders. Sometimes, it looked like walking out of history without applause. Nia broke the silence. "You never told Mom about any of that." "She thought I worked in communications," Ruth said with a grin. "Technically, I did." They both laughed softly. Then Ruth turned to her niece. "I wear this necklace not so they remember me, but so I do. When the knees ache. When the store clerks look through me. When the officers don't ask questions before grabbing my arm. This reminds me. I was more than what they see." Nia's throat tightened. "I think people are starting to see now." Ruth nodded slowly. "Maybe. But don't wait for the world to notice you to know your worth." Later that night, Ruth opened a letter from the Department of Veteran Affairs. Inside was an invitation to be recognized at the National Capitol during their annual Women in Service ceremony. She read it once, twice, then set it down beside the others. Whether she accepted it or not didn't matter, because for the first time in a long time, the truth didn't need clearance anymore. It lived in her walk, in her words, and most of all, around her neck. The auditorium wasn't packed. No bright spotlights. No media circus. Just a modest stage with a podium, a banner overhead that read, "Women in National Service, honoring those who served quietly." Rows of attendees sat politely, mostly staffers, veterans, and family members. Applause came and went with each name called. But when they reached Ms. Ruth M. Langston, former Intelligence Operations Analyst, DI, the room shifted. Not louder, just still. People leaned forward, because by now, they knew who she was. Or at least, who she refused to be reduced to. Ruth took the stage slowly, her cane tapping with calm precision. She didn't wear a new outfit, just her cardigan, slacks, and of course, the necklace, hanging outside her blouse this time. She adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the audience not like a speaker, but like someone finally reclaiming space. "I was told once that the most powerful weapon I could carry was discretion," she began. "But sometimes, that weapon turns inward, silences you, shrinks you." She looked to the front row, where Nia sat, smiling through damp eyes. "I didn't ask to become a symbol. I just asked for eggs. What I got instead was a reminder that silence doesn't protect you when the world decides what you're worth based on what you look like." Murmurs of agreement moved through the room. Ruth continued, her voice steady. I serve my country without needing a stage. But I realized something. When dignity is attacked publicly, the response must be public too. She paused, then dropped her final line. So no, I won't hand this necklace back to a museum, because it was never meant to be a decoration. It's a reminder to me and now to all of you that we don't earn basic respect by revealing medals. We earn it by existing, and that should be enough. Then she stepped back. No mic drop, just a quiet exit that spoke louder than applause. After the ceremony, a young congressional aide approached her. Ms. Langston, your story changed how I see my own grandmother. Ruth smiled. Then maybe you'll start listening before assuming. The aide nodded. I already have. By the end of the week, Ruth's speech had been posted online twice. Once by the Capitol's event team. The second time by someone in the audience who added the caption, "You shouldn't need to be a war hero to be treated like a human being." It went viral again. But this time not for rage. For recognition. Back home, Ruth made herself tea. Sat by the window. Let the quiet return. She'd said her piece. Not to go viral, but to make space. For the next woman. The next elder. The next voice so often dismissed until it echoes across timelines and dinner tables. Now the world knew who she was. But more importantly, she remembered too. What if we stopped needing medals to take people seriously? What if respect was given, not earned by struggle? We want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed someone being judged before being understood? What does dignity look like when no one's filming? If you were in Ruth's shoes, would you have stayed quiet or spoken? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone. Let's have the conversation most people are too afraid to start. And if stories like this moved you, hit subscribe for more real-life narratives that matter. Because the next story might just be yours.